Welcome to our FedTalks executive video series. We're here with Chris Roberts, Chief Technology Officer and Federal Engineering Leader at Quest Software. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
I'd like to start by asking, where have you seen cloud services making the biggest impact in helping federal agencies make faster or more valuable use of their data recently?
Sure, and that's a vast area of success that we've seen across the federal government, and it's not widely known, but I think one of my favorite examples is the thing that affects us most, that is weather. Most of us don't realize that the local weather report we watch every day, on whether it's the local Fox station and ABC station, for instance, all that core data comes from NOAA, the National Ocean Atmospheric Administration, and all that data is aggregated, and it used to be aggregated on physical storage appliances. So satellite data would come down, radar data would be collected, Doppler information, and would all be consolidated into their local data center. I think there's one here in Maryland, there's also one in Boulder, Colorado. And those physical data centers were massive, and I think they're still massive. But what I've noticed now is that to really make that data more available to weather forecasters, to climatologists, for instance, which is very important right now. If you've taken a trip out west and flown over Lake Mead or any of the reservoirs in the west, you literally see the rings of change because of the drought. Well, weather data now is extremely important, and in pushing that out, not just from a single data center or just a centralized data center, but pushing that into the cloud and making it available at the edge. So think of the old scenario, the guys used to chase tornadoes across the Midwest, hurricane hunters or tornado, chasers, for instance, or storm chasers, that's what we call them. They didn't have access to this data. It was all local data. Now, NOAA is making this available at the fingertips, for instance. So mobile devices have access to it. All the data from the Hurricane Hunter, those planes that fly into literal hurricanes, that's available to us, for instance, and it's more scalable. So instead of having a single bottleneck, for instess, where all that data reside, you now have it in the cloud where they can burst during times of emergency. So if there's a hurricane, for instance, and FEMA's responding, for instance, and now you need access to that data, it's very easy for our end users, whether it's a citizen or a climatologist or a weather person or someone working in FEMA, to get access to the information and deliver real-time impact and services to the citizens in the country that may be suffering.
That's a great illustration. Thank you for sharing that one. And then the other question I have for you is, how do you see federal agencies shifting their IT investment priorities heading into the new fiscal year based on your recent meetings with executives?
Sure, we call it chasing the budget. And frankly, the thing that impacts what's being spent right now is what's top of mind. And usually that resolves around security. And security or cybersecurity, or information security, depending on who you're talking to, is a very vast space, once again. So you have to focus on what are the key things that you need to protect and what you need to budget for. And what I've found is that people that are in an organization live by their identities. Identities determine exactly what they do, what they access, how they get access to it, for instance, and what they can do with it. And then those identities give them access to platforms. And on those platforms, we run processes or applications. All of those things require immense scalability, they require immense infrastructure, and it requires budget, for instance. The key thing I've seen them do now is that instead of just buying more resources, whether it's cloud resources or physical or infrastructure, they're now focused on things like what we call governance. And governance is something that we haven't paid attention to in a lot of times because we thought we had security. We talk about zero trust, for instance, well, that's a model. Governance literally says, well, not just where is my data, who has access to my data, for instance, and what are the rules for accessing that data? Right now in the news, we talk a lot about classified documents. Well, there are rules for how we access and how we retain data. So what I've seen now, budgets have shifted a little bit to say, hey, you know what are you doing for governance, for instance? Not just, securing data, but now what about governance? So can we answer to Congress, for instance, who touched what, where, and when, for instance? If there's a data breach, it's not just patching the breach and plugging the hole, it's what left through the hole, for instance. And governance allows us to know exactly what type of data was exfiltrated, for instance, and exactly now, how do we now either change that data, warn people about that data breach, for instance, and that's very important. Take the Equifax example, for instance. That impacted every American, quite frankly. And now, when the federal government has a data breach, it's even more impactful because that's citizen data. So they're spending more money on governance, for instance, and how to basically put that halo effect of security around the actual data that chief data officers are responsible for, and we citizens expect to be available on time, for instance, and in a totally protected environment.
Well, Chris Roberts, thank you so much for sharing some of your observations and insights about what's taking shape in the new fiscal year in federal government.
Outstanding. Happy to be here at the FedScoop.